Good morning, and thank you for joining us for this TenantCloud webinar. My name is Chris, and I'll be the host for today's webinar. If you can hear me, if you can go ahead and hit one of those little emoticons at the bottom of your screen, just so I know that everybody can hear me. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Very cool. Glad to see it is working. And if this is your first time joining us for one of our live webinars, we do host a webinar usually every month, and we usually pick a different topic. If there's a particular topic that you would like to see covered on either the Tenant Cloud system or in property management in general, something that you feel like maybe you could get brushed up on, definitely feel free to reach out to us and let us know. You can email us at sales@tenantcloud.com and just message us and let us know, or even put in an idea support ticket using the need help button in the bottom left-hand corner of your Tenant Cloud account. And just let us know what it is that you would like to attend a webinar on, what topics you would like to hear more about. A lot of the webinars that we host are not necessarily rocket science, because nothing in property management is necessarily rocket science. And so I apologize in advance if you feel like some of the information that is shared is stuff that you're already familiar with. If you're like me, though, you tend to like to get a refresher on stuff that you may not do on a regular basis, or maybe you're getting back into it, or just in general, you want to make sure that you're up to date on the most common practices in the industry at this time. And so hopefully the information that is shared is beneficial for you. And we would definitely look forward to seeing you come back on future webinars as we explore more topics in the property management field. So without further ado, we're going to jump right in. We do try to keep these also as short as possible. I have gone past time on the previous webinars. If you have not attended previous webinars that we've hosted, you can view them on our TenantCloud YouTube channel. They are typically uploaded there within a day or so after they are hosted. So if you would like to check it out on YouTube, or if you have to leave this one early, feel free to check back on our TenantCloud YouTube channel within the next day or two, and it should be uploaded there for you to view. Or you can also use the same link that you used to join this one. That same link, you'll be able to come back into this application and view the recording of it here as well. So again, thank you for joining, and we're going to jump right in and get right to it here for you. So I'm going to go ahead and share this screen here. Excuse me. I do see a question before I click share screen. It says, discusses finding quality tenants, but the schedule mentions rental documents every landlord should have. I apologize. That may have been a little bit of text left over from the last event. But this particular webinar is going to be on how to find quality tenants with a customizable application and integrated screenings. And so that's the primary topic we're going to cover here. So let me go ahead and share the screen with you real quick. All right, and so this is the topic that we're going to cover today: how to find quality tenants with a customizable application and integrated screenings, and all of the best practices that come along with that. Before I get into that, though, I am going to show you the actual tool in the Tenant Cloud system, which is where much of what we're going to be discussing revolves around. And that is the rental application itself, as well as the screening tool. So if you are not familiar with this, you can find this page by going to your gear wheel settings icon in the upper right corner. And then you can go to the rental application tab here in the settings menu. And this is where you set up all of the online application settings, some of the things that are going to be applicable to what we're going to be talking about shortly. So do you want to receive rental applications online first and foremost? And do you want to receive the fee for the application online? Do you want to invoice the application fee after accepting the application? So meaning you want to review the application before charging the applicant the fee. And do you want to make those application fee transactions not visible to owners? If you have owners on your account that have a portal, you can choose to not have that transaction show up in your accounting and reports that the owner would see. That is typically in the case when a property management, when your contract with the owner states that there is no revenue sharing program with the owner. So you do not share application fee revenue with the owner. That might be in the case where, let's say, your application screening cost is $30, but you charge a $40 application fee. There's time and effort and that goes into and manpower that goes into doing screenings. And so that's something that a lot of property management companies collect on as part of the application fee to cover that cost. So that $10 overage would be considered some type of revenue to the property management company to cover their expenses. You can put in terms of agreement. So a lot of terms of agreement can be included in here. And then there is the template field configurator. And if you've never clicked this button, you should probably go into your account as soon as this webinar is over and click this button, because it opens up an entire section of the application that you can fully customize. You can require certain fields. You can make them optional. You can even completely hide entire fields. So if you don't allow pets, for instance, you can set pet requirements. Is there a pet photo required? Social media links, additional income requirements. All of this stuff is optional that you can set up in your TenantCloud account as part of your screening or pre-screening process. So vehicles, additional occupants, references, how many references you want, 5, 1, 0. Residences, how many residences do you want them to provide? Their past 5 residences. Employment, how many previous employers they've had. Emergency contacts, how many you require. Attachments such as bank statements, letter of employment, additional attachments, ID, tax returns, anything at all. And then you have the option to enter in custom screening questions, which again, all of this is going to tie into the presentation we're going to cover shortly. So you have the option to create your own custom questions. It can either be a yes or no choice, or it can be a short answer. And even if you do a yes or no choice, you can also still require a short answer based on what their response is to that question. And so there's a lot of functionality here that gives you the ability to screen and pre-screen your potential tenants to help you streamline your application process. There are additional documents you can upload. Let's say your particular state or city requires a particular physical document that maybe they have to download, print, sign, whatever it might be. You can upload that here, or it could just be any attachment related to the application process. Maybe it's additional disclaimers. Maybe, again, it's another type of state form that is required. Whatever it is, you can upload it here. And then you can also put in custom agreement and authorization verbiage. You can require an e-signature or choose to not require an e-signature, and then update your application and move forward. Then once you have the applications come in, which I don't have any new applications, but I do have some old ones here, you can then go and screen these applicants, and you can move them in from here, but you can request a screening report. And so from the screening report, there's 3 different options, and these are going to be different based on the prices, may be different based on your plan. If you are on the business plan, you may have a slightly different rate for them based on the number of screenings you're doing each month. But you would select whichever screening option you want, whether you want a background check, because again, some cities and states require that you cannot do both a credit and a background simultaneously. So that is an option in here as well, so that if you need to do the background first, or you need to do the credit first, or you can only do one or the other, you have that flexibility. And it tells you what each one includes, and then it walks you through the process, whichever one you select, which we won't go through that now because that's not necessarily applicable for what we're about to cover. So that's just a brief overview of the tools in TenantCloud. The application, you set up the application, you customize it, you set up this pre-screening requirements, you tell people up front what the expectations are for your rental properties based on that application that they're going to be completing. Once they fill it out, you see that they have met your criteria for approval. Assuming everything else is equal, once you do the screening, then you do the screening, and then you move them in. And all of that is done in the TenantCloud system. So without further ado, we are going to jump into the presentation here, and just want to make sure that we're still connected here. Awesome. Occasionally, I have technical issues with presentations, but it's generally rare. So we'll just continue going on here. So we're going to cover the importance of a quality listing, the importance of a customized application, the importance of pre-qualifying applicants with rental criteria, and the importance of a consistent screening process. First section is before you even get to the screening part of the process of finding a quality tenant, you need to make sure that you are attracting the right tenants in the first place. This is a pretty big deal, and we'll jump into why. To do that, you need to make sure you do the following. You want to create a high quality listing. We actually just published a podcast this morning at 6:30 a.m. Central Time, which covers this very topic about how to create a high quality listing and all that goes into that. Listing your rental where potential tenants are searching. Apartments.com, Rentler, etc. You can do that in the TenantCloud system. You can syndicate your listing out to some of the most popular rental listing websites out there, but not all cities and geographical areas are your tenants looking on the same platforms. For instance, in New York City, there's a particular platform that people use where that's like the big platform that New York City tenants use. If you go to Salt Lake City, Utah, for instance, that's another place where the primary rental listing site that tenants look for rentals on is actually Rentler. And actually, most of Utah is Rentler. And so, uh, depending on what city you are in, you want to make sure that you understand where your rental listing is going out in your particular city, because in your particular city it may not just be the big listing sites, it may not just be apartments.com, it may not be Zillow, it may not be Hotpads, it could be Craigslist. Believe it or not, Craigslist is still huge in a lot of cities. And so you need to make sure that you are paying attention to where your potential tenants are searching and where you are finding your highest quality tenants. Part of what you can do to do this is each month or each quarter or each year, however you want to do it, you should do an audit. When you get applications coming in, one of the questions you should probably be asking is, how did you hear about us? And if the person is consistently saying, I found you on apartments.com, and you're listing to all these different places, and 90% of your tenants are coming from apartments.com, well, you should probably place a little bit more emphasis on apartments.com. Maybe you should consider premium listings on that website or whatever it might be. And making your listing and marketing strategy focused more around the platform that you're already getting the majority of your tenants from. And so you can do that on a monthly basis, a quarterly basis, or an annual basis. It will really help you narrow down where your tenants are coming from. It's even better if you have built-in analytics if you have some type of a tool that allows you to do built-in analytics that shows you where your individual tenants come from. If you have some type of software that allows you to do that, that's even better, because then you're not just relying on the individual applicant's answers. You're actually able to narrow it down based on data analytics that's going to tell you where people are coming from. So keep that in mind when you are listing. Where you list is just as important as the actual listing itself. The next thing you want to do is highlight benefits of the property location. Example given, is it downtown? Is it near parks? Is it near quality schools? Your listing should tell the person where it's at. It's great that it's on a map on whatever listing site it's on, but the text in the actual listing should give a brief overview of where it is, because everybody is searching for a rental for a different reason. Some people will be looking for it based on what school district it's in. Others will be looking based on where their job is located. So what part of downtown is it, or what part of the city is it in? For instance, in Austin, Texas, the city is broken down into like 5 to 7 different types of neighborhoods. Highland Parks and different East Riverside. And so you want to make sure that you tell in the listing where this rental listing is located, because some people might even be looking for it based on a keyword. So they might actually type in the Mueller district of Austin, or they might search Highland Park in this city, or whatever it is. And so if your listing has those keywords in it, it gives you a better chance of your listing surfacing when they're searching based on those keywords. And so it's important to use those when creating a property listing. Pets, deposits, utilities, smoking policy, what is and is not allowed in your rental property and what are the expectations. If it's somebody who enjoys smoking in their apartment, I don't know how common that is these days, but if that's the case, then they probably aren't going to want to rent from you. If that's the case, if they have a pet, but you don't allow pets, you're going to save yourself a lot of time if you put that front and center on the listing that you do not allow pets. It'll save you a lot of time and hassle and them a lot of time and hassle. Deposits. What is your deposit? Is it half month's rent? Is it a full month's rent? Again, that is going to really help you pre-qualify people based on what they can and cannot or do and do not want to pay as a deposit on a rental listing. And then detail the touring and application process. People want to know what the process is. They want to know that it's not this lengthy, drawn out thing. Just detail it, simplify it for the person who is searching for your rental so that they know what the next step is. If you have a listing, say, when you click on this listing and you inquire about this rental, we will get back to you within however many hours. If it's 24 business hours or 24 hours, or if it's 4 business hours or 2 business hours. And a key point for this is all of the surveys and research into response time for listings in the rental industry shows that the faster that you respond to an inquiry, the more likely they are to rent at your property versus your competitor. It's something that is very common, and people expect instantaneous responses these days. So if you can even do things like integrating some type of instant chat or text, which is nice because on the TenantCloud system, if somebody reaches out to you via text, you can actually text them back from TenantCloud's CRM system. It's our customer relationship management tool. You can actually text them right back to the phone number they provided on their application through our CRM tool. So it's super convenient. You can do it right from your phone because you already have the smartphone app, or you can be logged in on the web browser. You get that lead come in, you hit them right back with a text saying, hey, thanks for sending in that application, or thanks for sending in your inquiry about wanting to tour. What time works best for you? Blah, blah, blah. And you knock it out. And you're one of the first people to reach back out to them, because I guarantee if they clicked on your listing and submitted an inquiry of any type, they also did it to probably 5 or 6 other properties over the course of 20 or 30 minutes. So the quicker that you get back to them, the better. Section 2, the importance of a customized application. When potential tenants are going to apply, oh, and I'm sorry, by the way, if you have any questions throughout this presentation, feel free to post them in the chat thread. I will answer as many questions as possible once we're through the presentation itself. Just want to streamline it and get through the presentation, and then we'll go ahead and touch base on any of the questions that are posted in the chat thread. So apologize, I didn't cover that early on. When potential tenants are going to apply to your rental, it's important that you have an application that each and every applicant fills out. To avoid any fair housing issues, the application should be the same for each and every tenant that applies for your rental property. This is especially important. This is applicable to most property managers and landlords in the United States. There are a few exceptions that fair housing does not apply to in terms of the law itself, but that is few and far between. For the average property manager or landlord who manages a handful or more of rentals, you're going to want to make sure that every applicant fills out the same application every time. If your application has an addendum to it, that addendum needs to be completed by every single applicant. They all need to sign it and they all need to date it, and everything needs to be filled out across the board. The reason for this is you don't want to use 2 separate sets of text for your applications, because it could have some type of discrepancy between one or the other. Maybe it's your rental approval criteria, or maybe you asked one person for their ID, but you didn't ask the other person, or maybe you asked for pay stubs from one person, but not the other. Whatever it might be, any of those types of discrepancies can get you in hot water when it comes to fair housing issues. So the best way to avoid that is to have a standardized application that every single applicant for that property fills out. And so that's kind of what is convenient about the TenantCloud application, is once you save it, that is the same application that every single applicant is going to fill out. Now, that does not necessarily mean that the rental criteria for each property needs to be the same, because, for instance, I at one point was managing properties between North, East, and South Austin. I don't remember the exact unit count, but it was a lot of properties. And it was more of a regional position. And a lot of those properties, each was a different type of property in a different type of neighborhood with a different set of demographic. And so each property had, even though I was managing them all, they were all under third-party ownership, and each owner had their own set of criteria that they wanted to approve for their rental property. So for instance, one property may have approved and allowed somebody with a misdemeanor in the past 2 years, whereas the other property did not allow applicants to be approved and move in with a misdemeanor within the past 2 years. That's just an example. And so, but the application that everybody filled out was the same across the board. It was just that the criteria that they were approved for each property may have slightly differed based on the property owner and their requirements for the property. So just keep that in mind. The application can still be the same across the board in most cases, but the rental approval criteria may not be the same across the board for the various properties. In most cases, the application that tenants fill out should have some standard information that each applicant needs to provide: the name, contact information, date of birth, social security number, driver's license number, and expected move-in date. The expected move-in date is extremely important because they may have looked at 10 different listings or 20 listings, and they might have reached out to 5 or 6 of them, and they may have gotten the move-in date openings confused between the rental listings. This has happened more than once to me, and that confusion may come into play after you've already gone through the screening process. You approve them, and they're like, great, cool, I'm looking forward to moving in on Monday. And you're like, wait, what? They're not moving out until Tuesday, and we're not going to have the rental available until like Thursday. I where did this date come in? Like, it's because they probably looked at multiple rental listings and they got it confused. And so you want to make sure that they put on the application, what is your expected move-in date? That way there's no confusion when you're looking at the application and you see that date and you're like, oh, they want to move in on the 5th, but this isn't going to be available till the 10th. Or maybe they put in October 5th when really it's not available until November 5th. You can immediately address that with the applicant and say, hey, I noticed on your application that you put in this move-in date. I just wanted to make sure, was that a typo, or is that the actual date you need to move in by? Because this rental is not available by that date. And maybe you have another rental that you can direct them towards that is available for that date, or maybe they're able to be flexible and maybe they can move in earlier or later than what they thought, or whatever it might be. You just want to catch that in advance, because otherwise you're going to waste a lot of time with those applicants going through the process that you shouldn't have even gone through because there was some type of communication or misunderstanding at some point along the way. Aside from the basic information, you may need more information to help financially pre-qualify the tenant. So yes, you need all of that basic information, their personal identifying information, but you may want to pre-qualify the tenant, and you may require that, hey, I need to know what your monthly or annual income is based on how you approve rental applications at your property. You might require 3 years of employment history at your rental property, and maybe they can only provide 6 months, and maybe that's going to immediately disqualify them. Proof of current employment and income, and references. And so all of these things are just simple but efficient ways that you can pre-qualify people so that you can save, again, both you and them time and money, and not have to go through this lengthy screening process only for it to all fall apart. Then you'll want to make sure that the tenant has a positive rental history. In order to do that, you'll probably want to get the following information: 5 years of prior addresses. That may seem like a lot, but at most rentals that I have managed over the years, that's generally what we required. It can be more, it could be less, whatever you are allowed to in your area based on your local laws, but that's what I have typically done over the years. Property management contact info from the past 2 years. So if you need to reach out to previous property managers with a rental survey form, those are kind of becoming a little antiquated because a lot of property managers are no longer filling those out, or they do not complete them in their entirety, because a lot of times there are questions on them that are could land them in potential legal hot water. In the United States, people tend to sue for quite a bit of stuff. And some of the lawsuits over the past years that have taken place have revolved around that property manager survey form, where one of the questions might be, would you rent to this renter again in the future? And property managers would put no, or they might give this lengthy answer as to why not, completely bashing this tenant and blah, blah, blah. And then that prevents this person from getting qualified. And as it turns out, it was a he said, she said situation. There was nothing that happened in court. There's no documentation behind it. And now it has affected this applicant's potential rentability at homes in the future. And so those tend to go unfilled these days, or they've changed a lot of the questions that are asked on those forms these days. So definitely want to look into whether or not that's something that you should use or not. But regardless, having property manager contact info to be able to call, let's say you do a rental screening and you do a credit check and it shows that, hey, they owe $350 at this rental property, and the applicant is like, no, I don't owe that, I don't know where that's from. You could reach out to the property manager, you could have them call them, whatever it is, and say, hey, I have this applicant, there's this amount that is owed, blah blah blah, and see what that is about. Whatever it might be, it's just helpful to have the property management contact info. Monthly rates of previous rentals. Again, this gives you a good sense of, has this person paid rent that is the equivalent of what I'm charging at my rental property in the past? And if so, how long did they live there? So if somebody says they lived at this property for the past 2 years and they were paying $1,750 a month in rent, and your rental property is $1,500, well then, and they're still working the same job, then chances are they're probably going to be able to continue affording your rental property. And so that just gives you a good indication of whether or not they are going to pass the pre-qualification step of the screening process. And now that you have all of that core information needed to pre-screen the applicants, you can proceed with the actual screening process and the importance of pre-qualifying applicants with rental criteria. Prior to accepting applications, it's essential that you have a rental criteria that is well defined as part of either the listing itself or on the application. Wherever you publish it, it needs to be early on before the prospect gets too far into the process of expressing interest in your rental property. And we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, where if you don't allow pets or you have a high deposit, maybe you require 2 months of rent upfront as a security deposit, regardless of what their credit comes back as. Those are all things that should really be disclosed early on, because it may weed out some applicants who would never have applied for your rental property if they had known that in advance. And they're going to back out at the end of the screening process anyway, and you're both going to just have likely wasted a bunch of time. So ideally, that information should be on the rental listing so that you don't even have to waste the time of touring with people, because those people are going to see it right on the rental listing and be like, oh, they don't allow pets. Well, I have 2 pets, so I'm going to keep looking. The exception may be if you manage other rental properties that you may have available for those tenants who do not meet the requirements of the rental they originally expressed interest in. What do I mean by that? So I already discussed how over the years, I've managed a lot of properties in a lot of different areas. And so if that is you, when you have different rental properties with different rental criteria at each property, maybe one property doesn't allow pets, but the other property does allow pets. And so maybe you don't put that disclosure on the individual rental listings, because if that person does reach out about a property that does not allow pets, for instance, you can be like, well, hey, I don't allow pets, or the owner of this property doesn't allow pets, but I do have other properties in the general area that do allow pets. If you're interested in those, I can send you that information over. We can schedule a tour or whatever it might be. It's a great way to capture the lead and still get them into one of your rental properties, even if they don't meet the requirements of the rental property they originally inquired about. And so if that's you, that's definitely something you want to keep in mind when you are creating the listings. Sometimes maybe you don't want to include all of that information up front. Some things you will likely want to cover on your applicant criteria are going to include, again, monthly income requirements, eviction rental history requirements, felony misdemeanor requirements, and credit score requirements if you have any of those requirements. Just one thing on these, there are different ways that you can go about listing requirements for each of these items. And it's important that you, especially if your property is connected in any way to like the HUD program or anything like that, because a lot of those have restrictions on what you can and cannot approve or decline based on these different sets of criteria. So it's important that you are aware of that and that you pay attention to those rules as part of any program that you might be a part of That may be a supplemental rent program or whatever it might be. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at these types of requirements. There are restrictions in some of those programs. Making sure that your application criteria is highly visible will help to weed out any potentially unqualified tenants. It will save you and the applicant time, hassle, and money because they won't fill out a pointless application for a rental that they won't get approved for. And section 4, the importance of a consistent screening process. After you have pre-qualified your prospective tenants, now you need to screen them. And similar to the application, every screening should be done the same way every single time. Again, this is based on the area that you are in. If you have properties in multiple states or cities, this may not be possible because every state or city may have a slightly different requirement, whether it is local city ordinances or state law or whatever it might be. May force you to not be able to do this. But if all of your properties are in the generally the same geographical area, then it is helpful to have the same screening process for every single tenant, and certainly for the same property. Every applicant for the same property should certainly be screened the same way every single time. And there should also be a defined criteria for what determines if someone is approved or not. That criteria should be strictly adhered to, since any contradictory denials or approvals could land you in hot fair housing water. What do I mean by this is if somebody applies for your rental and maybe your rental criteria says absolutely no misdemeanors of any type within the past 2 years, and you get one applicant and you're at a time where you're not really your occupancy is kind of high, you're not really struggling to find tenants, and you're like, you know what, I can't approve it, I'm sorry, you don't meet the criteria. But then 6 months down the road, you're really struggling with your occupancy rates, and you find yourself looking at an applicant who had a misdemeanor, let's say 19 months ago. They're right on the edge of being at that 2 year mark. And you're like, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and approve you, even though we don't approve people with misdemeanors in the past 2 years. That is an absolute no no. And that is going, if your criteria spells out that you can't approve anybody and you won't approve anybody and you haven't approved anybody recently under that criteria, and then you suddenly change it, that is going to not look good if somebody finds out. And so you want to be very careful when it comes to defining your criteria and sticking to those criteria regardless of the circumstances. And so it's very important to keep that in mind. The other reason that you want to make sure that you have the criteria clearly defined is because you want people to know what could potentially get them declined, because they may disclose stuff up front that will help you, again, pre-qualify them and either save them time and money, or maybe you'll be like, maybe it's a concern they have that is just completely unwarranted, and maybe they thought it was related to the screening criteria, but when they tell you what it is, you're like, that, no, I mean, assuming all else is equal, that doesn't sound like that's going to affect your approval chances. So again, defining the criteria and making sure that is published and available to the applicant. In fact, I don't know about all states, but I know in the state of Texas, it is required that an applicant be provided with an application criteria, especially if it is multifamily properties. It is a requirement that the applicant knows what they can and cannot be approved or declined for. We just covered this. I jumped ahead here. Same exact example about approving a misdemeanor for one and not another. Here are some of the things that should take into consideration when screening a potential tenant. One, we've already covered a few of these things, but just to recap, check employment history. A landlord should always check employment history before renting to a potential tenant. This will help to ensure that the tenant has stable employment and can afford the rent payments each month. Now, it's also important to note that it is very important to take a look at the employment records that they provide you. There are a lot of very shady, I don't even know if you can call them companies out there now, that actually will generate false pay stubs. And a lot of them are completely wrecked with errors throughout them, and they're usually pretty easy to pick up, but some of them have gotten pretty good at it and are a little bit more difficult to pick up on. If you are part of any property management or landlord group on Facebook or Reddit or anywhere, you will see that this is becoming more and more of an issue, especially as rental rates have increased across the country. People are more and more looking for ways to falsify their income. And so you'll want to pay attention to details like how many hours were worked on one pay stub versus the other, versus how much they earned, bonus discrepancies, annual totals versus what they're currently making each month based on the number of hours they're working. I saw one the other day where their year-to-date income was like 96,000, but the hourly rate was like 16 an hour, and they were working like 50 hours a week. And it showed that their income was like 96,000, and there was nothing in the bonus section saying that they had earned any bonuses or commissions or anything. Like, it was just a complete wreck. And so sometimes it'll be that obvious, and sometimes it won't be. But definitely keep an eye out for that when you are looking at employment records, such as pay stubs and things of that nature. 2, check criminal records. A landlord should always check criminal records before renting to a potential tenant, assuming that you are allowed to do that in your city. Some cities are starting to crack down on that a little bit. This will help to ensure that the tenant has no criminal record and will not pose a threat to other tenants or the property itself, if that is something that you are concerned about or are allowed to screen for. Check rental history. A landlord should always check rental history before renting to a potential tenant. This will help to ensure that the tenant has not had any problems paying rent in the past and will be able to pay rent on time in the future as well. At most of the properties I've managed over the years, we had a standard policy across the board that if you owed any landlord still on your credit history, that they had to provide proof of payoff for that debt owed to that landlord or property manager. Otherwise, it would be a flat out decline for the rental property. And we would disclose that in our rental criteria at the time that the person applied. So that was very clear up front. So it did help weed out some people who would say, oh, yeah, well, I had this situation with the roommate a couple years ago and they completely wrecked the place and then left and moved out and I couldn't afford it and I had to move out. It wasn't my fault, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, if it shows up on your credit, you're not going to get approved for the rental, unfortunately, until that debt is cleared. And so I've had people pay it off. I've had people who just drop out of the application process entirely. But either way, it's disclosed up front. It helps weed out some uncomfortable conversations that may still have to take place further down the screening process. Check the credit scores. A landlord should always check credit scores before renting to a potential tenant. This will help to ensure that the tenant has a good credit and can afford the rent payments each month without having problems with late payments or other issues related to paying rent on time each month. This includes things like utilities. Even if you don't care about the actual credit score itself, which a lot of property managers and landlords are kind of straying away from that a little bit these days and are looking more towards specific identifiers on the credit check itself. And one of those things is typically we already discussed, if they owe landlords from prior rentals money, and 2, if they pay their utilities on time. Do they pay their cell phone on time? Do they pay their car note on time? The core things, do they pay those things on time? And if not, why not? And what's going on there? Those could be red flags for declining rental applications. But again, you want to make sure that that criteria is clearly laid out for the applicant. Once you have attracted the right prospective tenants, pre-qualified them early on, you've screened them to ensure that they meet all of the criteria for your rental property, you'll want to move the process along quickly to get a lease signed and finalized. The steps are list, pre-qualify, tour, screen, approve, and e-sign. Sometimes some people do the screening before the touring, but a lot of people these days are leery of doing that because there's a lot of scams out there, a lot of scamsters. That's actually how they operate. They always do a screening before they let you tour because they can't give you a tour, but they still want to do a screening and get your money for the application fee and potentially steal your personal information as part of the screening process. And so I personally don't recommend that and would never do that. I would always tour before the screening process. Again, a lot of applicants are wising up to that these days, and they will refuse to screen prior to touring, which frankly is smart on their part. So something to keep in mind if that's your current process. You may actually be losing out on potentially qualified tenants that just didn't even bother because they weren't going to fill out any information as part of an application before touring. And then approve and then e-sign. The quicker the process, the better. Again, there's a lot of scenarios that have played out over the years where, in my experience, if you take your time and you do not qualify somebody, you don't communicate with them properly, you don't tell them, hey, I've approved your application. We've got you set up for this move-in date. I'm going to send you the lease. We need it signed in the next 24 hours. Otherwise, we're not going to delist the rental. We're going to continue taking applications, because what you'll find is that, like I've shared a few times over the course of this presentation is people are not generally just inquiring to your rental property, and they may have applied somewhere else, or they may have put in uh, interest somewhere else. And maybe that other place didn't have availability the first time they looked, but maybe that place had a really diligent leasing agent that reached out to that potential applicant and said, hey, I know we didn't have anything when you first inquired, but we have something come available now, and we'd like to tour it with you if you have time today at 3 o'clock in the afternoon to go and check it out. And if you haven't signed a lease with them yet, then, and that place was their original, that was their initial first choice, guess where they're going? They're going to that rental. So it's very important that you go through the process as quickly and as efficiently as possible, and communicate with the applicant throughout the process to make sure that they are aware of where you're at in the process and where the next step in that process is. And I'll give another example of how that might play into it. I applied at a rental one time years ago, and I have lived all over the place. And so when people do my background checks, it takes forever because they have to pull data from like all over the world. So it literally takes multiple days. I was not aware of that at the time that I had applied for this, because it was one of the first rentals I had applied for. It was way back in the day. And the leasing agent was not getting back to me about the application process. And I was the one having to follow up and say, hey, where are we at in the application process? I've looked at a couple other places. I need to know if I'm approved or if I need to go with option B or C or whatever it might be. And so it was just really a hassle. And that experience still sticks out in my mind today. It's really not a good first impression. First of all. And second of all, if option B or option C had reached out, and or if I had taken the initiative to go to one of those places and put in my application there instead because I got fed up with the process, then that first place would have completely lost my lease. As it was, at least I was able to get through and talk with the leasing agent and get updates. And eventually, after several days, they approved it, the background check came through, and blah, blah, blah. But it's just very important to maintain communication with your applicants, especially in scenarios where things are, for whatever reason, taking a little bit longer than what they should. Because even a high quality tenant who's been approved may want to back out of a rental at the last minute for any number of reasons, and it is not uncommon for that to happen. Sad to say, but I have personally had that happen at my rentals over the years. It's definitely not fun, especially if you've gone through the process of screening and all that good stuff, and they back out at the last minute and you don't have a signed lease, which is discussed here. And if there's no signed lease, you are out of luck. So that wraps up the presentation portion of this webinar. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the screen here. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat thread here, and I will get through these questions to answer any of the questions we can. Again, hopefully the information shared in this webinar so far has been valuable to you and helps you to improve and streamline your process going forward. Are the rental applications available for all plan levels of TenantCloud or only certain tiers of the platform? So I believe that it is available starting on the growth plan, if I am not mistaken. Let me just double check here. Yeah, so the landlord forms itself are available in the growth plan, but that does not mean that you cannot use the lease form builder or upload existing forms that you have outside of TenantCloud that you want to upload and assign signature and date locations on the form. You can still do all of that. You can still do the e-signature thing. You can still do all of that. The landlord forms are just pre-written, pre-approved forms that are applicable all across the nation to be used across the board by all landlords and property managers. So that is available on the growth plan. But all of the other stuff, the ability to upload a PDF form for any type of lease or document template or whatever, the e-signature tool, all that stuff is available on the other plans. How does the application get generated once we create our customized template? Is it accessible through syndicated websites, or do we receive any sort of hyperlink for sharing directly with prospective tenants? How does the application get generated once we create? So the application is, yeah, so there's going to be a link that you can actually share with the applicant. So for instance, if let's see, I'll share the screen here real quick, and we'll go to the listings page. I don't know if I have a listing here. Yeah, I have 0 listed. So let me put in a listing real quick, and I'll show you exactly how that works. And we'll set an availability date. Yes. Small and large dogs. Yep. And yes. Oh, and a different address. It doesn't want to accept that address. All right. So we'll go and view that available listing. And from here, you can click the invite to apply button. So from here, or even from your application page, you can click this invite to apply button. You just put in the person's email address, and it's going to send them a request to apply for the rental. And it's going to have a link in there that'll take them straight to the application page, and they can fill out the application. So it's very simple and straightforward. And that is coming directly from that settings page in the upper right hand corner of where you set up the application and customize all of the questions and things of that nature. If someone doesn't meet your criteria, can't you approve it still if they agree to conditions? For example, an applicant may not meet my credit score requirement. If they agree to a double deposit, then I may approve the application. Yes, certainly. Again, this is applicable based on where you're at in the United States and what the laws are. But in most cases, yes, there are things that you can do to mitigate any risk that you may have by approving somebody who does not strictly adhere to the criteria of the application. So if they don't meet the credit score requirement, or maybe they don't even meet the income requirement, but let's say they have a savings account that they can show you that they have $100,000 in savings, or 50,000 or 20,000, whatever it may be, that helps to offset the lack of income that they have to get approved for your rental property. Certainly, those scenarios play out where you may require an additional deposit, or maybe you require that they pay the first and last month's rent, or whatever it might be. Yes, you can certainly do that. I've even had applicants who they did not have any job at all at the time, but what they did is they just paid for the whole lease term upfront. So whether it was a 6 month or a 12 month, they just paid for the whole lease term upfront. So that certainly happens on a regular basis. So yes, I did. That's a great question. I did not cover in the presentation. I'm so glad that you brought that up. That certainly does happen, and that does play out. Is there any way for TC to verify pay stubs? I had a situation where a tenant submitted a fake pay stub. I ended up finding out because I requested a doc be signed and the employer's IP address was the same as the applicant's. There's no way, there's no software that I'm currently aware of that can automatically verify pay stubs. What most people do is a lot of times, not all the time, but sometimes what will happen is on the credit checks, it will tell you where the person currently works. And you can, of course, reach out to that company, or you can check to see if that company matches the pay stub that they provided you with. But really, the only tried and true way is to call the number on the pay stub. Look up the company name, call the company, or even email them, employment verification form, whatever it might be. At all of my rental properties, we would do basically that. We would basically call if we could. If it was a large company, they might even have a HR number that you can call, where the applicant can provide you with their employee number, and basically it verifies that they are an employee at that company. That was pretty common in Austin, especially a lot of the tech companies. They had that HR system where you just call the HR number. The employee gives you like this employee number, and you just punch it in on the phone, and then it basically reads back an automated thing saying, or it would even be, some of them were even website based, and it would just say, yes, this person is currently employed at blah, 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 as of this date. So just depends on the company, but the tried and true way is to just reach out to the employment company and verify their employment that way. If you have any questions, of course, there's other ways you can do it. You can always ask for an official IRS document. So there's different ways you can do that. W-2, W-9, depending on their employer. You can always certainly request more official documents that are more difficult for them to falsify than just a typical pay stub. So I'm glad that you're looking at the pay stubs. It's becoming an increasing problem, and I'm sure that as that problem continues to grow, there will certainly be solutions that are available out there. There may already be, and I may just not be aware of them. But if there is, they certainly need to reach out to the property management industry, because there are property managers and landlords all over the country that are really struggling with falsified documents like that. So it would be great if there was a standard solution for it, such as a software program that could somehow vet and screen those. Once a potential tenant submits an application, can we download the application in PDF? Yes, you most certainly can. When they submit it, you can download it in a PDF. You can even download their screening results once you do the screening, because screening information is typically only available for about 30 days due to the laws surrounding credit checks. And so you can still retain that information if you're able to in your area, or your company allows you to. If you guys need to print that off and put it in like a physical file or something, or download it and then upload it as a PDF to maybe a digital file for your tenants. You could even upload it as a digital file inside of your TenantCloud account to the tenant's account. You could even upload it there once you've downloaded it from their screening page. Otherwise, that information becomes unavailable. The screening information becomes unavailable after 30 days. So, but you can certainly download that information as well and save that as a PDF. I charge a $60 application fee, and it includes the $39 screening. For some reason, I'm not sending the invite correctly, and it asks the tenant to pay the $39 screening. Can you please walk through this process? So yeah, there's a few different ways that you can do that in the TenantCloud system. I'll walk through it real quick here, but if you have any questions on how to do that, or you're struggling with understanding how that works, definitely reach out to our support team, because they will certainly be more than happy to walk you through that and make sure that you understand how that works. But basically, when you are listing a rental property, like the one that we listed, for instance, let me go ahead and view that listing, and I'm going to go ahead and edit it. It is, let's go through here. Next. Leasing details. Next. All right, so there's two options right here: allow online application and require applicants screening, and require application fee. So these two buttons right here, one, yes, you want to allow the online application by default. And this is where things might get a little bit confusing for some people. Require the applicant screening and require the application fee. You should not have both of these boxes selected. It should be one or the other, because one box requires that they pay you the application fee, and then you'll process the screening and you'll pay for the screening. The other option is that they need to pay the application fee at the time that they're doing the application. So instead of paying you the $60, it's saying they'll pay the $39. So if you only want them to pay you the application, then you would just select this box saying, I want them to pay me the application fee. And when you're going through the original listing, it'll ask you what that application fee amount is. So when they go to do the application, they're going to see they need to pay the $60 application fee. Now, if there's another way to do it, if you are setting this up, you can say, I don't want to require the applicant screening, and I don't want to require the application fee. So basically what happens in that scenario is the person just puts in the application without paying anything at all. And that allows you to pre-screen the information on the application form. And then when you receive the application on your end and you've reviewed it and you're like, yeah, you know what, it's good, I'm going to go ahead and bill that person for it. you'll have the option to do that. You go to request screening report, you select the screening that you want to process, and it's going to say who's going to pay for the report. You would say applicant. I want them to pay for the report directly. So you can do it that way too, but you aren't able to collect the $60 application fee if you do it this way. This way is going to bill them that standard $39 screening report. But there's multiple ways to do it. So if you have any confusion on how exactly that works or how you need to set it up for the way you're trying to do it, certainly reach out to our support team and they'll be able to assist you with getting that set up properly. Is there a way to bulk update older leads so they are moved to a closed status? I have leads from 2021 and I can't remove them easily since I have over 800. Wow, that's a lot of leads. So typically from what I've seen most people doing, they update the leads as they come in. I can certainly see how that might be a little bit rough on editing them. I don't know that there is a way to bulk do that right now. However, that is a fantastic idea. So what I would recommend doing is go to the need help button on the bottom left hand corner of your account. And, oh, you have requested it. Okay. So what I would do is I would request it again because the more people and the more often that a feature is requested, the more that it is prioritized on the roadmap. We have hundreds of features that are requested over the course of the year. And so it really comes down to what the squeakiest part of the wheel is. And that is where the grease goes. It's true of most software companies and it really guides the roadmap on what gets built first and what gets deprioritized over time. So if that is something that you really want to do, anybody who wants that feature who's on this webinar, go in and put in an idea ticket right now because that is how those things get prioritized with our roadmap. If you are not putting in an idea ticket and you're just thinking it's a good idea, but you don't ever say anything, it never gets to our product team. Those idea tickets go straight to our product team, and they actually did they tracked it last year for all the improvements and changes that they did and all the new tools they introduced last year as part of all of our releases during 2021. And our product management team discovered that about 70, I think it was like 78% of all improvements and feature updates were a direct result of user feedback through those idea tickets. So your voice is certainly being heard. And so definitely put in the feedback so that our product team knows what our users are looking for and what they need and what they want. And the more people that ask for it, the more likely it is to be built. Yes, I totally agree. It is certain. It can certainly be better. Just keep in mind also the CRM feature that is actually our initial release of that tool. That tool was just released about a year, maybe a year and a half ago. And so that particular feature is relatively new in just generally speaking. TenantCloud is about a decade old or so. And so a tool that's only about a year old, that's still a pretty new tool. And that's the first rendition of it. So, which means that it's probably coming up for a refresh now that they've been collecting feedback on it over the past year, year and a half. And so now I would say would actually probably be a perfect time to put in that feedback again, even if you've submitted it previously, to submit it again. So again, definitely put in that feedback. Can you discuss any future and near-term updates that are coming to the screening process? We won't tell anyone. I'm not aware of any that are currently coming up. One of the things that is pretty cool right now, though, as it pertains to tenants and screening them and all that good stuff, is that tenants can actually opt into credit reporting now to the credit reporting bureaus. I believe we currently report to at least two. I think TransUnion and one of the other ones are on there. So that is something that is helpful. A lot of tenants are looking for that these days. It's being marketed. You've probably seen the TV ads for it, pushing reporting rental and utility payments and all that good stuff to build people's credit. And so that's something that tenants are actively looking for now when they're looking for a rental. So the fact that TenantCloud offers that now is pretty cool. And a lot of tenants are actually opting into that. So A lot of tenants are super excited about that feature. So you can tell your tenants or potential applicants that are looking at it, you can even list that as a potential benefit to them is, hey, when you rent out my property, the software that I use allows people to be able to report their credit. And you'll be surprised how many tenants are actually super excited about that. So other than that, I'm not aware of any major updates that are coming to the screening process, but I'm not necessarily privy to that information as I'm not directly on the product team. I'm more in the marketing and sales side of the company, so I don't necessarily talk with the product team that much regarding upcoming features. Listings did used to be added to the Facebook Marketplace. They discontinued their beta program. They were testing it out, and we were one of their early adopters. We were one of the few companies that got approved for that beta program. And I think that it was going pretty well, but the reason they gave for discontinuing that program, I believe they said something about they wanted to focus on building their traditional marketplace first. So they did not rule out that they will get back into the syndication for third-party software companies such as TenantCloud to syndicate listings, similar to how Zillow and Apartments.com and all them work. But they basically made it seem like they may have gotten into it a little bit too early. And so they reverted back to where you have to manually list your rentals on the Facebook marketplace now. There is no company out there any longer that is part of that beta program. They discontinued it. So you can rest assured that if they do relaunch that program, we will be one of the first companies to reapply for it to be a part of that again. And we already have the infrastructure in place for it already. So through their API and whatnot. So if they do relaunch it, then we'll certainly try to get a part of that program again. But I think that is pretty much all of the questions that have come through. We've certainly gone way over the time limit for this presentation, but again, hopefully you've found the information valuable, and we appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us. And if you would like to be a part of future webinars, certainly email us either at support@tenantcloud.com or sales@tenantcloud.com and let us know to make sure that you are on future invitations or join our newsletter. You can join that at tenantcloud.com/blog, and you can join there. And anybody who subscribes to our blog newsletter will get an invitation to all future webinars that TenantCloud hosts. We typically try to host one once every month or so. So again, thanks for joining, and I appreciate all of you joining with me, and we'll look forward to talking with you next time.